All right, welcome to our continuing study on sonship transformation. This is session 8, part A, and we're going to be talking about forgiveness today. And what we're going to be learning is what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. We're going to talk about why forgiveness is so important, and we're going to talk about how to forgive from the heart. In order to be truly transformed and to gain our freedom in Christ, we're going to need to relate to other people on the same basis that God relates to us. And what is that basis? Complete forgiveness. Now, most of us know that, when things happen, we ought to forgive. But I have to tell you that almost everyone has this issue of unforgiveness lurking, in their life somewhere. It's very common. Now, some people feel like what they have suffered is kind of a special case, and so forgiveness is not really an issue for them. I'm hoping that in the lesson today that you'll find out that's not the case. Some folks are kind of deceived into thinking that because they have forgotten all about an issue, that it's not anything that they really need to be concerned with. And I think you'll find out today that that is not the case either. And then, of course, some people wrongly believe that they either cannot forgive or that they should not forgive. And we'll get a chance to talk about those too. But most people don't understand what forgiveness actually is and why we're instructed in the Bible to do that. And so when we examine forgiveness properly, and we really understand it from God's point of view, here's what will wind up happening. I'm really glad to say this. Most people make a choice to forgive from their heart for the sake of their own freedom and their relationship with God. And that really is what's at stake here. Now, Satan does present a lie in our minds that says that we cannot forgive. And I want you to understand, he is the author of that. God, when he asks us to do that, would never ask you to do something that you cannot do. So the very fact that God is asking us to do it tells us something about that. So let's begin with talking about why forgiveness is important. I'm going to list these up on the board, and we'll kind of walk through these, and we'll have to go through the whole lesson to get them all. But I'm wondering if it would surprise you to know that the thing that gives Satan the greatest opportunity to get a foothold in the lives of Christians and defeat them is not the things that people commonly would think. If you were to just ask the average congregation about that, someone would say, occult activity. Well, occult activity will certainly do that, but that's not the biggest one. Most people are just not involved in occult activity. Another big one is sexual immorality, and that is true. That'll open up a door for Satan to build a stronghold, and a lot will happen because of that. That's true, but that's not the biggest one either. Someone might say, well, involvement with different cults and those kinds of religious attachments. And that's out there, but that's not it either. It may surprise you to know that the biggest issue is an unwillingness to forgive. And the amount of believers that are walking around with unforgiveness is absolutely staggering. And almost nothing gives Satan a greater opportunity to stop your spiritual life than this issue of unforgiveness. So what I'd like to do is point you to the PowerPoint because there's a passage here I'd like for you to look at, a couple of verses here in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And it says in verse 10, "To whom ye forgive anything, I forgive also. For if I forgave anything to whom I forgave it, for your sakes forgave I it in the person of Christ." And then Paul is going to tell us in verse 11 why he would be willing to do that. "Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." In other words, when he says we're not ignorant of his devices, Paul says, hey, we know that Satan is using this kind of an issue to actually now get that opportunity to set up a stronghold in us and to actually stop our spiritual life. Paul connects forgiveness with Satan getting, actually not forgiveness, but unforgiveness with Satan getting an advantage of us. There's a number of ways in which Satan gets advantage of us, but this is a big one, unforgiveness. And so usually the reason, when I said there's a large number of believers that have unforgiveness, I'm not saying they're that way because they're trying to be mean or that they're evil spirit, not anything like that. It's usually because people either don't understand what forgiveness really is. They think it's something else that it's not. And because of that, they just can't see themselves doing it. The second reason is because they don't know how. I have actually had people say to me they're talking about a situation, and they would say, I know I ought to forgive them, and I want to forgive them, but I just can't seem to do it. What they're really saying is, I don't know how. This is going to solve that. I'm going to show you exactly how that works. So I want you to think about something right now. I want you to answer this question in your mind. What is the worst thing that anyone has ever done to you? Now look, I know this is a serious, if you're going to do this is a serious thing, but look, we're going somewhere with this. So I just want you to think in your mind, what is the worst thing that anyone has ever done to you? Now, if you have that in your mind, I want you to think about two questions in connection with that. Here's the first one. Why should you forgive that? We're actually going to be answering that question. That's what I've got up on the board. When I say why we forgive, that's the answer to that. And we'll see what those are. And here's the second question. And how do you go about forgiving that person for what they did? So I know that this is a tender area for folks when we're talking about this. And so I want to handle this as gently as I can. But those are the issues that we're addressing today. And I want to convince you that forgiveness is the right thing to do. And I also want you to know why it's the right thing to do. So here's the first reason. The first reason that we forgive is simply because it's God's command to do that. Now, I know that doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you're, really thinking about what's going on. It may not in the very beginning. But I'd like to read a verse that Paul wrote to the Ephesians, and take a look at this with me because look, this is the right thing to do, and I want to convince you of that. So take a look at Ephesians 4:32. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Now, if God tells us to do something, even if it's something you might not want to do, it's important to remember this, that if God is telling you to do something, if He's the one that's asking you to do it, this is ultimately for your benefit. It is ultimately the right thing to do. And so if those things are true, and they are, to do what God asks you to do is the thing that will be most beneficial to you. Now you may be thinking, oh, no, they're just trying to help out this person that hurt me. That's not what's here. This is really about helping you. And for sons and daughters who know that our Heavenly Father is asking us to forgive, just knowing that ought to be enough. I mean, if you really love God, knowing that this is what He's asking, that ought to be enough. But because we are sons and daughters, He doesn't just say, hey, do this and don't worry about why. He is explaining exactly why you need to do this. And I'm hoping this is going to convince us. Because after today, you're going to be in the workbook. And once you get into that workbook, it's going to be you and the Lord and no one else. And I want you to do all of the work that ought to be done. So here's the second. So the first one is because God commands that. And I'm not saying that in an overbearing sense that God just gave you a command. Well, you know what? He is telling us to do it. But you have to understand this is ultimately right for us. And it is best for us. All right, the second reason that we should forgive is because our relationship, I'm trying to think how can I abbreviate this. Our relationship with God is at stake in our forgiveness. And so I could say it this way. Our relationship with God is tied to our relationship with other people. Now, you might say, well, how does that work? But I'm going to say it this way. You cannot have a right relationship with God if you don't have a right relationship with other people. Now, it really is connected. Let me show you something that the Apostle John wrote to the believing remnant of Israel. It's in 1 John chapter 4, and look at verse 20. He says, if a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, how can he love God, whom he hath not seen? Now, folks, that may have been John writing to the believing remnant, but that principle is just as true today in the dispensation of grace as it will be out there in Daniel's 70th week. God wants us to relate to others on the same basis that God relates to us. How does God relate to us? Complete forgiveness. That's the basis that we're going to relate to others in our life. Now, let me give you so here's the first two. God is asking you to do it, and that's not meant to be a punishment. That's supposed to have been a benefit. Our relationship with God is at stake here. And here's the third reason we ought to forgive is because our freedom in Christ. Our freedom in Christ forgiveness is essential to that. And when I'm talking about freedom in Christ, I'm talking about being free of the tormentors that come with unforgiveness. Did you know that there are tormentors that accompany unforgiveness? Before the session today, Clifford and I were having a discussion, and he was giving me this very example, and I thought, man, he's preaching my lesson today, right up here in the front. He's saying exactly what I'm going to say. And so we're going to read something here in Matthew 18, and so I just want you to understand that what you're about to see in Matthew 18 is a physical illustration. But what's happening for us today is a parallel in the spiritual realm. Everybody with me there? Okay, so let's start reading this. Matthew 18:21. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee, until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Now, I'm not kidding. You would think I'm joking, but I can remember being a kid sitting in church. Now, when I was a kid, back in the Stone Age, there was no children's church. All the kids were sitting in church. Unless they were in the nursery, they were in church with the parents, and I sat between my mom and dad. And so I had to sit still, I had to pay attention, and anyway, we had our rules. I remember Brother Harvey preaching on this verse, and he went 70 times 7. I remember taking my church bulletin and a pew pencil and doing the math, and I thought, I have to forgive them 490 times? And you know, he's preaching this sermon. I don't remember Brother Harvey, Charles Harvey. He was the pastor of Sunset Acres Baptist Church. And I just remember thinking, I never heard him say, he's not really talking about 490. You're not supposed to keep a little clicker in your pocket, and when someone sins against you, click, okay, there's number 84. And, you know, just a few more, and I don't have to forgive him anymore. When Peter says, how often do I forgive? 7 times? And Jesus says 70 times 7. You know what he's really saying there? You're just going to keep forgiving. You're just going to keep forgiving. It's not about the actual number. Now, I didn't realize that. Brother Harvey dashed a lot of my hopes when I was a kid, because I can remember one time doing something and making a deal. I was trying to make a deal with God, and I was saying, Lord, if my dad doesn't find out, I'll be really good. You know, I'm talking about what I'm going to do. And then, and I'm not kidding, shortly after that, I hear Brother Harvey say, God doesn't make deals. I was crushed. I thought, oh no, but I need him to. I really need him to. I don't know what it was. It was, in my mind, it was a big thing. I'm sure to my dad it probably wasn't. And I don't even remember if he found out or not. That stuck with me. I mean, to this day, God doesn't make deals. Don't think that ever left my head. I kind of got that down. Okay, so let's keep reading this thing here. So in Matthew 18, so Jesus is talking. We're going to pick this up in verse 23 when he says, forgive 70 times 7. Then look what he says in verse 23. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. Now, let me explain that. Under the law of Moses, if you had a debt that you were not able to pay, then the person who owed the debt, and in certain situations, even the rest of the members of his family could be sold in the sense that they had to go to work as servants, and whatever money they would have earned as servants, that went toward the debt. And they had to keep working until the debt was paid. And so here's a man that owes 10,000 talents. Well, I was curious when I was going through this, how much money is that? To give us a perspective in today's deal. Well, first of all, you have to understand, talent was not a coin, it was an amount of money. Okay, so it's like if your electric bill is, $200, that's not a denomination of money, that's just an amount that's owed. Everybody understand? So a talent is not a coin. Okay, so 10,000, I looked at this and here's what I found. 10,000 talents is 200 years' wages. So I calculated that up using the average income in America today. And here's what it was. 13.4 million. So that's a pretty good debt. Okay. Not much for Clifford, but for the rest of us, it's pretty good. Okay. So look. Okay. So let's. So now you know this is a sizable amount. So what is going to happen? Him and his wife and his children are all going to have to go into servitude until the debt is paid. If it's 200 years worth of service, I don't know how many kids he's got, but let's say it's him and his wife, and it's his 2 kids, so there's 4 of them. 4 into 200 is 50. They'll be working 50 years. So if his kid is 15, his kid will be 65 when the debt is paid. I mean, that's his life, right? Okay, let's pick this up in verse 26. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. Now, a pence is a day's wages for a laborer. Just so you get the idea. So a pence in today's money. Now again, I'm talking about the average in this country. And you have to realize that in another country, that it would probably be a lot lower, just depending on what that country is. But in today's wages, you're talking about somewhere around $186. I actually did the whole calculation there. It was, I just have it rounded to $186. Okay, so if a guy is making, $20, $22 an hour, that's about what that is. So it's about 108, and he owes 100 pence. So you know what that is? That's $18,600. No, they're not working in our wages, but their economy is whatever that is. Because if you just want to go back to the early times, coming out of the medieval times, when if you're in England, you know what pence is? Pence is the way they say penny. That was a day's wages, a penny. Now in today, in this economy, penny, okay. All right, so anyway, this guy owes about $18,000. What did this guy get forgiven? $13 million. Okay. So now let's pick up this thing. So it says in verse 29, And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt because thou desirest me. Should not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not everyone his brother their trespasses. Now notice that this shifted at the end. In the beginning, he's talking about money, a debt, and the forgiveness of the debt because of the inability to pay. But at the end, here's what he says. Now, there's two parts to say here, and I've highlighted them both. It says, Lord was wroth and delivered him unto the tormentors. What, in the debt part, what are the tormentors? The tormentors are those who come and do what? They confiscate this man's property, and they sell it, and that goes toward the debt. What else would be a tormentor? Not just the guy that confiscates their property, but that would be the guy that, you know what? That would be putting them into prison and having them work every day toward the paying off of the debt. That's the tormentors. But that's in a physical sense, you understand. Now the Lord is going to shift from the physical into the spiritual, because He's not talking about somebody owing you money at the end of this. He's talking about forgiving your brother his trespasses. So it's not just about money here. So he says, and if you don't forgive from your heart, well, then guess what the implication is here? So here's someone that has done something against you. And because they have done something against you, You are supposed to forgive them, but if you don't, there are still tormentors. Now, will you be cast into prison? No. If you don't forgive, here's someone. I do something to Clifford, and I hurt Clifford in some way, and then he doesn't forgive me. Is he going to get cast into prison? No. Is he going to, are they going to come and get his stuff? No. It doesn't. See, we're not talking about the physical thing now. We're talking about the spiritual thing. So what are the tormentors in the spiritual realm? If someone has done anything to any of us, and we do not forgive them from our heart, which is another thing you were talking about when you were standing right up here. I almost used that terminology. When we were talking about this earlier, Clifford was talking about you have to really forgive them, not just say you do. In other words, it has to be a real thing. So that gets described in the Bible as forgiveness from the heart. But what are the tormentors if you don't forgive? The tormentors are the negative emotions that you begin to experience because you haven't forgiven, because you keep going over what they did to you, because you keep getting hurt by that over and over again. So give me an example of one of those negative emotions. Oh, great. Yeah, I'm not going to write it up because I got something else going. But yes, bitterness. Bitterness is a tormentor. What's another one? Anger is another one. Absolutely. That, and you know what? And is it not right? It makes you angry every time. Makes you angry every time. That root of bitterness takes root there. And look, now those are the tormentors. And Satan loves to take those tormentors and use them against you spiritually so that you cannot move forward spiritually in your life. You're just kind of stuck right where you are. And so what I'm trying to do is to show you that the reason we forgive is because that's how we get free from the tormentors. Do you see? That's the only way that you can do that. So, this third reason that we forgive is so that we can be set free from the past. You do understand, God can't undo your past. He cannot undo that which was done. But He can set you free from it and free from all the resulting negative emotions that came along with it. And you can actually be free from that once and for all. There is a way to do that. Okay, here's the fourth reason that we forgive, and it's very closely linked to number 3 because we forgive to, I'm trying to think of a way to put this briefly. Let me just say it and then we'll devise a way. That we forgive because when we don't forgive, we are opening up an opportunity for Satan to get a foothold in us and then to affect other areas of our life. So we forgive to prevent Satan's work. How about that? Let's just say it that way. We forgive so that we can prevent Satan from getting that foothold in us. And that's just one of the ways that Satan now you say, what do you mean when you say open up a door? It's an opportunity for Satan to produce a stronghold. And once he produces the stronghold, it's going to entrench itself. So that you know what will happen? A person will actually go from, I know I ought to forgive them, but this is really hard, they hurt me, and all of that is, I'm not saying none of that is true, but it'll go from that to one day you become entrenched and go, I will never forgive them. You see, and you'll get hardened through that. Satan loves that because you know what? You will never close that door on him and boot him out of that area of your life. You have left that door open permanently and given him a base of operations in your own soul. Now, we're going to discuss this a little more fully in part B of today's lesson. Okay, So we need to learn how to forgive freely, or, as we read a while ago, how to forgive from our heart. And what does that mean? It means that we truly do forgive, and we don't just say that we do. So, how do you do that? See, that's that other question, isn't it? We're answering that first question, why is it important for us to forgive? Well, I'm giving you the reasons for that. But now the second question comes along and well, how in the world do I do that? Well, I'm going to give you a 1, 2, 3 for that. The first step to being able to forgive others is to understand the debt that we owe to God and how much He has forgiven us. That is the first step. To understand how much you have been forgiven. So I want you to think about something with me here. How much do you think a perfectly holy and righteous God forgave you when you trusted Christ as your Savior? Now see, what you didn't have to do when you got saved is name all your sins. And that's a good thing. Do you know why? We would have been there a while. If you think about every thought, every word, every deed, every motive, when you think about that, how much did God forgive us? So I'm going to ask you, did He forgive you a little or did He forgive you much? See, I think all of us are in the much category. You say, well, not compared to, but see, you don't need to worry about compared to, Hitler. You know what? You should just think about what he has forgiven you of. And I think then, now you really do begin to understand that you have been forgiven much. And I think if we're honest, we all understand that. Let me show you the basis by which God asks you to forgive now. Considering that, so here it is in Colossians 3:13. It says, forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. So what's the basis of us forgiving someone else? That we got forgiveness as well. I'm going to take you back to the Matthew story. Here's a guy that got forgiven a lot, but as soon as he ran across someone that owed him, pay up or else. And so, see, and shouldn't he have thought about that? I mean, really. When the master called him back and said, hey, I dealt with you this way, and now shouldn't you have? Well, he should have. Well, the same is true for us. If we have been forgiven much, we're going to have to learn to forgive as well. And we're going to have to choose to do that. So no matter how well we think we may do, and I can't imagine it, but someone may be thinking, listening to this recording later, you may be thinking, well, look, God didn't have to forgive me of very much. I think if you say that and you mean it, you probably don't have a good understanding of what true righteousness is. Because, boy, we really come short. And the truth is, the Bible says that our righteousness, which means your best efforts, are like filthy rags before God. Why? Because that's self-righteousness, and that's just as wrong. So, without Christ, we all stand condemned. And we have been forgiven a lot, even though we may not realize it. But when we do, when we think about how much we've been forgiven, that increases our capacity to be able to forgive someone else. Now, let me tell you what's required to do that. In order to do that, you're going to have to know what mercy is. Mercy is going to be required for this process. So, to end this first part of this session, I want to define 3 terms for us. The first one is justice. And if you're talking about justice, what are you talking about? You're talking about what's right or what's fair. That's justice, right? And so when we're talking about justice, it means we're giving people what they deserve. So I want to put that underneath there. In fact, I should do that rather than put that definition out there. Sorry, this is a little bit of a process, but that rag is wet, and that means this won't write until I dry it. So, with justice, you give people what they deserve. Right? That's what justice is. And so, thankfully, God found a way to forgive us without compromising, because God is just. I mean, that is who He is. You say, wait, I thought God was love. He is. And I thought God was merciful. He is. And I thought God was just. He is. Yet the thing to understand about the attributes of God is He is all of those things, and He cannot be one to the contradiction of another. Are you with me there? Because if He did, then He was no longer that. So how can God forgive and remain just? There has to be a way for Him to be able to do that. And so God found a way to offer us forgiveness without compromising His justice. And how did He do that? Well, you already know the answer to that. He did that by placing all of that on His Son on the cross, who paid the price for all of our sins. So, guess what? Justice was done, but He arranged it so that justice could happen on His Son instead of on us. And then He could offer us forgiveness. Now let's do the second one, because this is the one we're really after here. Mercy. What is mercy? Well, in a nutshell, mercy is not giving what people deserve. That's mercy. So, when we're told to be merciful to others, it is because God has been merciful to us. But you know what? God goes even further than that. He goes further than not, because if we all got what we deserved, what would happen? We'd all be in the lake of fire. But God, what does He do? He pours out His wrath upon His Son, who bears the sins of the world. He offers us forgiveness, so instead of giving us what we deserved, He is not giving us what we deserve. That's His mercy. But guess what? Then along comes His grace. And what is grace? What is the difference here? Grace is giving people what they do not deserve. Do you see the subtle difference between those terms there? If you give people what they deserve, that's justice. If you don't give them what they deserve, that's mercy. But if you give them what they do not deserve, that is grace. So God is merciful, so guess what? I'm not going to give you what you deserve. But I am going to give you what you do not deserve. And what is that? Eternal life. Forgiveness. All of the things that God gives to us, and it's not just limited to that. So it all begins with the relationship that God established with us. So God is still perfectly just. He shows us mercy in that He doesn't give us the condemnation that we deserve, but He gives us the salvation which we do not deserve. See, one is not getting something, the other is getting something. So we don't get the condemnation we deserve, we do get the grace that we don't deserve. And so that is the model for how God is going to ask us to live as well. So this is just getting us into that. So this is the end of Session 8, Part A. But if you're watching this on the recording, stick with us, and we'll come back and pick up in Part B. Okay, welcome back. This is Session 8, Part B. And in this part of the session, what we want to do is we want to talk about what it means to forgive from the heart. So to forgive someone from the heart means that we have to be emotionally honest with God about ourselves and face the hurt that we experience from someone else and really face the pain. Now look, I realize this will have some level of difficulty to it. Not everything is just a little slight. Some things were much more than that. And so in the steps to transformation, what you're going to be doing in the workbook in the days ahead, there is a simple but effective formula that is given to you whereby you can go to God and you are choosing to be emotionally honest with Him. And you'll do this in a prayer. I'm going to put this up on the PowerPoint, and I want you to see the 3 parts to this prayer. This is the formula that you will use, and we'll detail it in the workbook, but this is the formula that you will use, and this is valuable to see. So here it is. This simple prayer says this: Lord, I choose to forgive. And then what you will do is you will name the person that you are forgiving. And then you'll continue by saying, Lord, I choose to forgive so-and-so for, and now you're going to name the thing that they either did or failed to do that hurt you. And so now the prayer would go like this: Lord, I choose to forgive so-and-so for doing such and such. It doesn't matter what that is, because it made me feel, and now you're going to, and this is where that emotional, exposure comes, because you're going to express the particular pain and hurt that you felt when they did that. This is the way that you face this so that you can let go of this. And what I would encourage you to do, because there is a section in your workbook in which, now you'll see it detailed there, but all of the things that come to your mind that you need to forgive, I'm going to ask you to go through this kind of a prayer with each one of those individually, not to do it corporately. Now, a lot of the things in the workbook are corporate, but I do not in this case suggest that you go through and say, Lord, I forgive everyone who has ever hurt me in some way because it didn't make me feel good. That's too general, and you won't let go of it doing it that way. So I'm going to ask you to just use this prayer as a template for every single one of those, so that we can actually let God lead us to the emotional core of this and let that healing take place inside. Now, this isn't always going to be easy, and it may be a little painful, but look, here's the thing to know. You can deal with these tormentors, these negative emotions of hurt and pain, once and for all, and then be free from it from then on. So it is worth facing this when you're doing this with the Lord. Now, again, remember what we're talking about here. How do I forgive from the heart? You can't forgive from the heart if you're being too general about it. It's just like, here's a husband says something to his wife. They're angry, and he says something, and it hurts her, and then later he comes back and he goes, I'm sorry. And she goes, for what? And he goes, that thing. And she goes, what thing? And he goes, well, that I said. See, is that how that works? No. You're going to have to be upfront and honest about that. You can't just kind of generalize that. And that's why when you're working through this, you need to do this in privacy, where it's you and the Lord, and you're able to articulate this freely. Now, look, we do this so that we can completely resolve all of these conflicts that we've been carrying around. Here's what Satan is going to tell you, and I'm warning you about it now. He is going to try to convince you that we cannot move on from the past. He's going to try to convince you that that will not work. He's also going to convince you you can't do it. But here's what you're going to learn. You are choosing to forgive. If you're waiting until you feel like it, guess what? You'll never get there. So you have to make a choice to forgive. So one of the key points that we have to understand, and when it comes to forgiveness, is that it's not really about us and the person who offended us. It's really between us and God. And the truth is, for you to forgive them, you don't even need to go to the other person. They're not involved in this part of the process right here. Now, if you do that, and you do forgive them, that may or may not make them reconciled to you. You know why? Because for them to be reconciled to you depends on more than just you. It also depends on them. So it may be that you get that reconciled, but it may be that they don't until they choose to also forgive. But here's what it does do. You say, but wait, what if we've been at each other and I choose to forgive them, but they don't choose to forgive me? What good does that do? Well, I'm going to answer it for you. It removes the opening for Satan to be at work in your life and use those negative emotions against you every day. Do you see what that does? That sets you free from the past. If they're not willing to do that, I am sorry, and you should be sorry, because you know what? It would be much better for them to be free as well. Do you know why? Because then you could actually reconcile. Now, it may be it's just on one side. And if it is and that person forgives, then maybe those folks can reconcile. But I'm just saying, even if the other person doesn't, this still needs to be done for your own benefit, because Satan is wanting to keep that opening there. Okay, here's the fifth reason that we forgive. We forgive in order to stop the pain. You know, Richard said something during that last interactive session where he said, you know what, we've been forgiven and we should do that. He said, but we go over that in our mind and we keep rehearsing all of that. And you know what happens every time you do that? All that pain comes back. All that raw emotion comes back. All that hurt and bitterness comes back. I mean, and it never ends. So when you forgive, it's really for your sake that you are forgiving. Now you might be thinking, but Brother Mike, you don't know how much they hurt me. You're right, I don't. But don't you see that if you don't forgive them so that you can stop the pain, they're still hurting you. Every time you bring that up, you're allowing them to hurt you all over again. And so how do we stop that pain? By forgiving them. It won't change the past, but there's something important here that we'll learn, and we'll get to it in this lesson. But the real hang-up here is not about what they did. And you'll see. Now, what they did is what it did cause something, and it wasn't right. I'm not minimizing that. But Satan is using that to gain a foothold, and then he's torturing us at the same time, those tormentors. So if you want to get rid of all of that, you forgive them. And some people think, well, I'm just letting them off the hook. Well, we're going to talk about that. But let me illustrate it to you this way. Let's suppose that we went fishing. So when I was a kid, my dad and I used to go fishing. We go bass fishing. We go on a Saturday morning, get up early. We'd be out on the water when the sun was coming up. And being, in Louisiana, we have plenty of cypress trees in the lakes up there, water that's only, maybe 3 to 4 or 5 feet deep and all in among these cypress trees. And we tie a little popping bug on the end of our line. And, we were fishing with open-faced reels. I can remember flipping that bail over and catching that line and throwing that rod out there. And that popping bug had just hit at the base of one of those cypress trees and bounce off into the water. And you just wait till all the ripples die off. Then you click that bail over and you take that rod and you wiggle it a little bit and that bug goes in the water like that. And boy, that bass had come out of there, grab that popping bug. You'd set the hook and reel that in. Okay, so we're doing all of that. I got so caught up in telling you that story. Because my rod, because I didn't, as a kid I learned if you have a real flexible rod, then in short spaces you could just flick your wrist and let the end of that rod throw that lure out in some tight spaces. When I was a young kid, I just needed a stick with line on it. You just, like a bat, you're just doing that. But you learn a little finesse with it. So I'm in the backyard, I've tied on this lure, and I'm practicing my casting. So I've got a hula hoop laying on the ground, and I'm back over here, and I'm whipping that out there, and that rod is just doing that and then throwing that lure out. And so I did it like that, and I felt it brush by me, and I kept looking for it, and I never saw it. But I saw the line just kind of doing this, and I went, where's the lure? And I was looking around. I looked. We had a pin oak back over here. No? What? So I start reeling it in until it does this. That lure, the hook, had double or treble hooks, I can't remember, came through my earlobe, and it was just hanging on my ear. I thought it had just brushed by me. So I've got this thing in my ear, and of course there's a barb on the hook, which makes it really hard. So you know what I got to do now? You know what? We got to cut the hook. So which means now, and see, to me and Dad, this is a big deal. We lost this lure. Now we either got to replace it, or just like that. But here's the thing. If I had hooked myself in a little different position, I didn't feel that one too much. But what if I had done that and had my face turned to the side, and that thing had hooked into the side of my cheek? And let's suppose I didn't do it. Let's suppose, I haven't picked on my sister in a while. Let's suppose my sister did it. And so she reared back and she did it, and she hooked my cheek. And I'm going, Sherry, I can't wait to tell her I've done this to her. Sherry, you hooked my cheek. How dare you? Now, would that likely be painful? It would. So how do I get rid of the pain? By going around telling everybody what my sister did and what a bad lure caster she is and how much that hurt? Is that what's going to get rid of it? Okay. It will not. So what have I got to do if I'm going to stop the pain? I got to take it out. I got to remove it. So let's suppose I don't. Let's just suppose I just leave it in there. We're going to take it out. No, it hurts too much. Just cut the line. Just leave it. Just leave it. No, too much. So you cut the line. I go to bed with it that night. Get up the next day. You think I'm better? No, I'm worse. And so now I got to tell everybody again. Can you see me standing in line at the grocery store with the hook hanging out of my cheek? And someone's looking at me funny, and I go, I know that looks funny. This is really painful. My sister did this. And let me tell you what a bad person she is because she did this. You see, I'm still going to hurt. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about how to stop the pain. So the way to do this is not to keep reliving the incident. It is to forgive. And that is the important lesson that we're going to learn in that. Yes? My screen went off? Okay. Okay. How'd that go? Okay. Well, Well, let's leave it. Okay. So I'm trying to get to, okay, part B. Okay. So this fifth reason that we forgive is so that we can actually stop the pain. Look, holding on to bitterness and anger and unforgiveness is like swallowing poison, hoping it'll kill the other person. It's just hurting you. It's just hurting you. So this is the end of Session 8, Part B. Okay, welcome back. This is Session 8, Part C, and we're talking about forgiveness. In this final part of the lesson, I want to talk to you about what forgiveness is and what it's not. And I want us to begin by talking about what it is not. And I think this is a major reason that people don't forgive is because they misidentify it. So let's talk about what it is not. So forgiveness is not, and I see, I put this up there, and I shouldn't have done that. Okay. Okay, thank you for bearing with me for a second here. Okay. So there's some things that forgiveness is not, and the first thing is forgiveness is not forgetting. And I want to talk about that just for a second. It's not about forgetting. Because remember a moment ago, in a previous part of this session, I said, think of the worst thing that has ever been done to you. If it's the worst thing that's ever been done to you, you probably didn't have to think very long to be able to come up with it in your head. And if I were to say to you, just forget it, how difficult would that be? It'd be, in some cases, it would just be impossible to do that. But you can't get rid of a hurt by simply forgetting it. Now, I can hear someone saying this right now. You're saying, wait a minute, the Bible says God forgets our sins. Okay, you misunderstand what that means when He's talking about that. God does not forget your sins. He is omniscient. There is nothing that has ever been in His mind that suddenly now it can no longer be in His mind. He could not forget that in the way we're talking about it right now if He tried, because of His nature of who He is. What He is saying is, I will remember their sins no more. He is saying, I am not going to call up those previous sins and use them against you in the future. I'm not going to remember it against you again. Do you see what He's saying there? And then when He says, so I've removed your sins from you as far as the east from the west. He said, I'm not going to bring it up. And when people argue, you know what they always do? They dredge up the past. In the old days, we used to say, they open up the door and pull out all the closet door and pull out all the skeletons. Remember when you did this? And it usually starts like this. You always do this. Remember 3 Christmases ago when you did this? And you did this 2 Christmases ago? And last Christmas? And now you're doing it again. You know what they're doing? They're remembering those things against them again. Here's the thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not forgetting. I know you can't forget. But forgiveness is choosing not to remind them of and bring up all those past failures. That's what it is. And that's a choice. That's not an emotion. That's a choice. And so when a husband said, no, we'll put the shoe on the other foot now. So when a husband says to his wife, I forgive you, honey, but you know you did this. Okay, you know where he's going with that? He's bringing that past back up. That's not forgiveness. Choosing to forgive means not that you're forgetting about it, but that you are choosing not to bring that up and use them against in the future. Here's the second thing, and this one is delicate. Forgiveness is not tolerating sin. Boy, that's really important. Because some people think this is an either-or proposition. Now, I'm going to give you some very difficult illustrations here. Does God forgive? He does. Does He tolerate sin? He cannot. This is really difficult when someone is in a situation where they are suffering something on a continual basis. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this. For example, here is a wife who is being physically abused by her husband, and it is happening on a continual basis. Now listen, there are some churches, if she went there for counsel, that would say to her, and she would tell this story about what's happening, they would say to her, hey, you need to go back home and submit yourself to your husband, because here's what the Bible says over here in Ephesians. And you know what they're acting like? They're acting like that it must have been okay because she happens to be married to this guy. So here's my question. What if he beat up another woman in the church? See, no one would think that one is okay, but because she's married to him, it's supposed to be okay. You just go home and you tolerate that. See, I believe with all of my heart that she can forgive him without tolerating those actions. You say, well, how in the world would she do that? I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to give you an illustration, but I'm just going to say there is something else sitting over there in Romans 13, and we've all been through, the folks in this room have been through this before, about God is the one that established human government, and He established human government for the control of violence in a society and even violence in a marriage. Would it be okay for a woman who is being physically abused to be able to separate herself from her husband and yet go through the business of forgiving him, but turning that over to the authorities? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Who else is going to do that for her? And so I know there's some tragic stories, so I'm not going to go down that road. But look, you have every right to put a stop to that kind of sinful behavior by removing yourself from a situation. Now, I know that will bother someone because they're going to look at that and they're going to say, well, I can't believe that preacher is advocating that kind of a thing. Well, look, we're not just talking about because you don't like the same TV programs. We're talking about this kind of physical abuse and not subjecting yourself to it. I'm going to read a real illustration to you that came from someone that went through this just like you're going through it now. And this is one of the trained encouragers, and so let me just read it to you. He says, a lady rang our office and told me that her Christian husband kept having affairs. She continually forgave him and took him back, but he kept on having affairs. I advised her to forgive him, but then draw a line in the sand and say that if he did this again, then he was going to have to leave. Now, that is not inconsistent with forgiving him. To be honest, you feel a little nervous when you give that kind of advice. Well, it worked. I met them again when they came to our marriage course that we were running. He thanked me and told me that the line in the sand was the wake-up call he needed to get his act together and sort his life out. So the point is, now I know you're not getting a whole lot of the detail there, but the point is that is a way to approach that, and I believe a biblical and godly way to do it. If you look, here's what I know about cycles of abuse. If you don't put an end to them, they will keep continuing. And you just need to know that. So someone says, oh, but if I forgive him, then I have to put up with what's going on. Not true. And it doesn't always have to be the husband. Sometimes it could be the wife. Sometimes it could be the parent. Sometimes it could be the grandparent. Sometimes it can be a child. But let me just say that those things are... I hope everyone understands the context of what we're talking about here to make a difference between choosing to forgive them and yet not tolerating sin. That's exactly how God does it. Okay, here's the next thing that forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not revenge. Look, the thing is, we remember the things that were done to us, and understandably, we want, and that's what we were talking about during the last interactive session when Sarita said they want revenge. And in their mind, they're thinking, I want justice, for what has been done. And we somehow think that forgiving means, oh, okay, so if I can't get revenge, then here's what you're saying. Then I should just sweep it under the carpet and act like it never happened. But that is not what forgiveness is either. Listen carefully to what Paul writes about this issue in Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. God is not asking anybody to sweep an offense under the carpet. And He's not asking anybody to act like it doesn't matter, because it does matter. So, He promises, though, if you will hand that situation over to Him, He will ensure that that will not be swept under the carpet when you forgive. And although you're letting them off your hook, so to speak, you are not, but when you forgive them, you're not letting them off God's hook. You're just making it so that they don't have the ability to continue to cause you pain. So when God says, I will repay, then when you choose to forgive, then you're taking a step of faith that God is going to do what He said He would do. That He will exact real justice for the things that were done. And at the end, God will make sure that the scales of justice balance exactly right. So nothing is going to be swept under the carpet with God. He will demand a full payment for everything that has been done against you. Everyone who sins against you will have to stand before God and explain it. And either it will be paid for by the blood of Christ, or they will have to face the judgment of God in connection with that. And when He says, I will repay, it means that God is going to settle every account someday. God's knowledge is perfect, His memory is fine, and God knows exactly what ought to be done. So you're choosing to take a step of faith and trust God with what happened to not only handle all of that with them, but also to remove that pain along with those demands for justice or revenge on your part. And you can do that knowing that God is not going to just let things go and people are going to get away with it and all of that kind of business. So now that we've seen some things that forgiveness is not, let's talk about what it is. Now someone may say, well, let me just say, sometimes forgiveness is learning to live with the consequences of someone else's sin. In other words, it's unchangeable. We all do that. You understand that everybody in this room and everybody listening on Zoom and everyone who will ever watch this recording is living with the consequences of someone else's sin. Now, I have in mind Adam's. Because Adam sinned, we're all born fallen and spiritually dead. That's the consequences. And you come into this world, there's nothing you can do about that. That is the condition everybody comes into this world. And we're all living with the consequences of that. Unfortunately, when kids are growing up, sometimes parents make decisions about things that adversely affects those kids. And there's nothing that can be done about that. They're just living with the consequences of that sin. I mean, here's a guy that, I mean, it doesn't matter how he gets into this, but he gets himself into a condition where he just doesn't know what he's doing. And, he's in an automobile and there's a horrific accident and it's a difficult thing and whole families get changed because of that. That cannot be undone. They'll live with the consequences of someone else's sin. And we're all doing that to some degree. And the only choice you have, you say, well, that doesn't seem fair. No, I'm not saying it's fair, but you have two ways to do that. You have two ways to live with those consequences. You can either do it in the freedom of forgiveness, or you can do it in the bitterness of torment. Because if you don't have another option, if you cannot undo it, then you're going to go through it. It's just how you're going to go through it. Your Heavenly Father is now offering you a way to get free of that event in the past so that it stops the pain and you are able to truly have a life, even though there may be an ongoing consequence, to truly have a life that is free from all of that. And I can promise you the alternative is not the road you want. To be able to relive that and to experience the pain of it. So let's bring this to a conclusion. You know what forgiveness is? Forgiveness is to set a captive free. And then you find out you were the captive. You're the one that really got free when you forgive. This is an issue between you and God. And the reason that He commands us to forgive is because He loves us and He knows what bitterness will do to us, and He doesn't want us to have that kind of a life. Now, you can agonize about what they did, how wrong that was, and you can... And by the way, some people kind of swing the pendulum on that. Sometimes people, especially those who have a really poor self-image, they will rationalize the wrong that was done to them by someone else. I have seen that a few times, where someone kind of acts like, I guess I had that coming because, and then they try to give an excuse for all of that. I would suggest to you not to do that. The issue of forgiveness is not really about who is right and who's wrong. If you feel like you were offended, then you need to forgive that. Why am I saying this to you? Because as you go through the workbook and you're going to go through the section on forgiveness where you can clear all of this out and stop that pain and deal with it once and for all, do not get into a debate with yourself about, really, was this my fault? And really, I kind of deserved what was... Don't get into that debate. Don't get bogged down in whose original fault it was. If you feel like it is offensive, then put it on the table and get free from it once and for all. That's the important thing. If you feel like it's there and you know that this is a way that Satan gets an open door to work in you and to torment you, close that door by putting it on the table and dealing with it. Don't try for a good score. We're not going to have a session where we all meet together and I go, who had less than 10 things they need to forget? Oh, who had less than 5? Oh, you're the winner. No. Whatever it is, put it on that table before God and deal with that and get freedom from that once and for all. And this is for you. Now, you'll have an opportunity to go through this when you go through the steps. So I'm hoping that you'll remember this. So let's finish this session with a prayer. I'd like for us to all pray this prayer together if we can. And this is going to be a prayer that actually talks about our desire to be free from these different conflicts in our life and experience the freedom in Christ that we were meant to have. So I don't think I put this on, I did put it on the PowerPoint, and so here it is. So let's just read this together, and then I have a couple of things to say to you when we're finished with this. So let's read. Lord God, we want to be free in Christ, and we want to be fruitful sons and daughters. We don't want the enemy to have any hold on us. So we say before you now that we are resolving to forgive all those who have hurt us, just as you have freely forgiven us, in the name of Jesus who died, that we might be forgiven. Amen. Now, I'd really like for you to take a look at that in the days ahead and think about the words that are in that prayer. Now, this is the actual end of the material for Session 8, but I have some final instructions for you. Now, these are not going to be in your notes, so I want you to just kind of pay attention to this, because where we've come to the place now where you're going to go through the workbook that's in your book, it's called The Steps to Transformation. And at some point over the next 21 days, before we meet again, which happens to be on the 31st of this year, I would like for you to set aside some time in which you'll go through the material in your workbook and deal with all of those areas before God. So I want to say some things to prep you for that. So here they are. The steps to transformation is where you'll take all the things that we've covered in these sessions, and you're going to do the spiritual work to resolve all of those personal and spiritual conflicts. That is where the real transformation takes place. All we've been doing up to now is setting you up for that. So let me give you things to prepare for going through the steps. This is before you actually get started. First of all, decide on a time when you can go through your workbook without being interrupted. You're going to need to be able to do this where you can kind of seclude yourself and pray out loud. Now, you don't have to yell, but you'll be praying out loud a number of times, and you want to be able to do that freely without being interrupted. Number 2, do your workbook alone. This is between you and God. So seclude yourself to a place in your home or somewhere where you can talk out loud without being heard, and you can't hear what other people are doing. You don't want to be in a place where you're listening to somebody else watch a TV program or listening to, some kind of music. You want to be able to seclude yourself so that you don't get distracted. Next of all, communicate with everybody in your home about this schedule so they can help respect that. The next thing is, and I forget to do this every once in a while, even when I'm up here, silence your phone. Because I'll guarantee you, as soon as you start in on that workbook, that phone will ring. I'm just saying. So work through the steps without at least, put it on silent. Before each of the steps, there is an introductory video. Now, we're going to post these and make them available. They'll be on Vimeo, they'll be on YouTube, they'll be on the Dropbox. We're going to make all of these videos available. And there is a short introductory video that you'll watch in connection with each of the steps. Okay? So you'll be able to look at that video. Now you can watch it on your phone, or you can watch it on the television, or your computer, your iPad, whatever you have. Now I'm suggesting, now you say, well, that's going to make it hard to be secluded because if I'm watching that on the TV, but here's the thing. You can sit down. Now, these videos are by and large pretty short. The first 2 are about 20 minutes because they're really getting you into that. After that, those videos are about 5 or 6 minutes. That's all they are. They've already been recorded, and I recorded them up in Glen Rose while we were doing these sessions here. Now, what I'd like for you to do is, like in that first session, watch that introductory video. And then, if you have to walk away from the television back to a bedroom and seclude yourself with your workbook to do the work, that would be the way to do it. A few sessions will have you coming back to the video. In other words, you'll watch a piece of the video and then I'm going to say, go do this work now and then come back and finish the video. So just pause that, go do that work, come back, turn the video back on and listen to the next set of instructions. So there's a few of those in which you'll kind of go back and forth a couple of times. Now, if it's not possible for you to watch the video while you've, kind of secluded yourself off to go through the workbook, then just go through the workbook. But I do think the videos will be helpful. I really know that they will be helpful to you. So if you can, please do that. Okay. There's some things that are in the video that are not in the workbook, and that's why I think that's going to be valuable. And here's the last thing as you prepare to go through the steps. You're going to need a pen or a pencil. You're going to need your workbook. And you're going to need a couple of sheets of blank paper. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a spiral tablet or a legal pad. It doesn't matter. But you're going to need a few pages of that. And the reason is because you're going to write some things down, not in your workbook, but on this separate sheet of paper, that when you get through, you're going to tear that up and throw it away. And you just don't want that to be a permanent thing in your workbook. So just saying, you're going to need a pen or a pencil, you need a workbook, you need some blank paper. Now let's talk about the actual going through the steps. For most people, to go through the whole workbook in one sitting will take between 3 and 5 hours. Now, for you, if you go through it and you say, it didn't take me 3 hours. Okay. But for some, you'll go, I couldn't get it done in 5 hours. Okay. I'm just saying, you understand, the normal time is somewhere between 3 and 5. You may be a little short or a little over, but it doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. But I do want you to know you're not going to do the workbook in 20 minutes. Okay. Next of all, take whatever time it takes to go through the workbook properly. Don't try to rush the process. Don't get in a hurry. You'll be tempted. Satan will put a thought in your head about, let's just breeze through this. Let's just breeze through this. And you know why he would say that. Because he doesn't want you to do this work. He doesn't want you to be free from all of that in the end. So watch the first video and then go through step 1 in your workbook. Follow the instructions that are in your workbook. And like I said, for some, you'll watch a portion of the video, pause it, come back, watch the rest of it, and then go back to the workbook. Remember that the real work that's being done here is between you and your Heavenly Father. There is no magic in just going through the steps. In other words, it's really the work that you're doing with God that does this. The workbook is just guiding that process for you. Here's the next thing. Remember that God already knows everything about you. He knows what's in your heart. He knows what you're thinking. So just be upfront and honest with everything with Him. It is just you and Him after all. The goal here is not about how quickly you can go through the steps or how little work you needed because you were all so far advanced. That's not it. The goal is to remove every foothold of the adversary and walk free from the torments that come with spiritual conflicts. So take full advantage of every step. Now, after you've done the steps, so now we talked about getting ready for it. That's what's going through the steps. And now after you've done the steps, as I said to you, there's a few things that you will not write in your workbook, but on a separate sheet of paper. Once you've completed the steps, tear those up and get rid of those. There'll be some areas in the steps in which the transformation is going to be instant and observable. You're going to go through it and you're going to be instantly free and you're going to be amazed. You're going to look at that and you're going to say, wow, that really worked. Once that happens, I won't have to encourage you anymore. You'll be encouraging yourself with that. But in some instances, where a stronghold is particularly deeply rooted, it may require you to continue to do some work after that initial going through the workbook. Just because of the depth of that. Don't let that bother you, though. You may say, oh, you know what? I do feel differently about it, but I still feel like there's some work that I need to do here. That's perfectly acceptable and right. What should you do in that case? Do that work. Do that additional work. That may mean, let me go back and look at this verse again and make sure that I see everything here the way it's intended. Or it may be, let me pay attention to this prayer. Am I really doing all the steps here? But just pay attention. It's not too hard that you can't do it. You can. But I just want you to know that there may be, while a lot of this is going to be instantaneous, there may be a few areas where it is not. So here's what I would say. If you're going to go through the steps of transformation in this 21-day period, I would suggest you do it sooner rather than later. Why? Because if you have to go back and go over an area, this will give you time to do it rather than waiting till the end. So don't treat this like preparing for finals where you're up all night the night before. Okay. One final word here, and that is there are some steps that you're going to look at and it's going to have very little to do with you. In fact, there may be a step in here that you will look at and say, none of that pertains to me. Just be honest about it. But if that's, and there may be some like that, and if that's true, then that's fine. But don't let that be a measure. You don't have to go talk to anybody about that. Just let it be what it is. And if you find a step that doesn't have anything to do with you or very little and you just go through it like that, then just proceed on to the next step. Now here's an important one. Ideally, you would go through all of the steps at the same time. But I don't know everybody's schedule. It may be impossible. You say, I can't earmark 4 hours at a time. My life won't allow that. Okay, then try to divide it up into as few parts as possible. The more time you spend in this, things tend to build on each other, and it really does help you in that way. So if you say, I'm going to do the first 4 steps today, and tomorrow I'm going to do the other 3, whatever. But I would suggest to try to do as many of them together as you can. But again, whatever it takes, go through them properly. Now, if you're able to watch the videos in connection with working through the workbook, I think everybody is going to be able to go through this on their own. You won't need any help. I think you'll go through the steps and you'll understand exactly what's going. But if you do run into a question and you need help with it, just call the toll-free 888 number or email Tracy and let her know, and I will get back to you and I will help you with that. And I'll try to be as prompt with that as I can be. And when we're finished with the Christmas break, we'll take this back up, session 9 on Sunday, December the 31st. Now that's a very important, because once you've done this work, here's what we're going to do. And in session 9, we're talking about how to create a stronghold buster. In other words, that doesn't mean that Satan is through trying to do things in your life. So I want you to have a process that you can employ that will tear down those strongholds. I'm talking about 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. This is going to serve you for the rest of your life, so you'll know how to do this. And it will also give you a tool whereby you will be able to help others in the future. Okay, so there's all the instructions that I wanted to say to you in addition to this. All right, well, that's the end of session 8. Thank you all for being a part of this. If you have any question, let us know. This is going to be great. This is going to be great. When we talk about sonship transformation, that's exactly what this is. This is a transformation. And when this is done, there'll be folks that will be going, why didn't we do this first? And that's a good question. But better late than never. So here we are.